Good afternoon, my friends. My name is Chad Baruchi. I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Business, and my colleague Richard Castleberry and I are very happy to welcome Jonathan Hillman here to deliver a lecture to us this afternoon. We have about 45 minutes or so. Jonathan will have some time to review what he has been up to, and there'll be time for questions and answers. But before I bring Jonathan on stage, let me share with you what I pulled off of the famous internet just a few minutes ago. And Jonathan can correct me because the internet may not be capturing everything that is clearly up to date. So Jonathan is a fellow with the CSIS Simon Chair in Political Economy and director of the Reconnecting Asia project. At CSIS, he leads an effort to map and analyze new roads, railways, ports, and other infrastructure emerging across the supercontinent of Eurasia. His research focuses on the intersection of economics and foreign policy, including trade, globalization, economic statecraft, and China's Belt and Road Initiative. He has written on U.S. foreign policy and national security issues for the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the National Interest, and other outlets. Prior to joining CSIS, Jonathan served as a policy advisor at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where he directed the research and writing process for essays, speeches, and other materials explaining U.S. trade and investment policy. At USTR, he contributed to the 2015 U.S. National Security Strategy, the President's Trade Agenda, and numerous congressional testimonies. He has also worked as a researcher at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, and in Kyrgyzstan as a Fulbright scholar. He's a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, where he was a presidential scholar, and Brown University, where he's elected to Phi Beta Kappa and received the Garrison Prize for Best Thesis in International Relations. And look how he's accomplished, and look how young this young lad is. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan to the stage.
So thank you for having me. It's great to be here with all of you. I don't plan on speaking for more than 15 or 20 minutes, and so I think we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I am very interested in what all of you think about some of the developments that I'm going to talk about. Although I get to come out here occasionally, you live here, and I think a lot of this really could impact you in the years ahead. And so I'm someone who's monitoring it from Washington. So I have my own perspective on it, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, and then getting some of your reactions. So everything that I'm going to show you is available on my organization's website, which is csis.reconnectingasia.org. And essentially, what I'd like to do is I'll provide a little bit of framing. What we're doing is we're tracking infrastructure across the Eurasian supercontinent. So not only Belt and Road, but what India is doing, what Japan is doing, what Iran is doing, what Kazakhstan is doing, and others. And so I'll get into that a little bit. I'd like to show you maybe 3 projects that I think are illustrative of some of the opportunities and challenges with infrastructure in general and some of these big initiatives. So why don't we dive into it? Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So actually, before we look ahead, I thought it might be helpful to just do a little bit of historical framing. So these days we hear lots about the Silk Road. It seems like every country is rolling out its own Silk Road initiative. Even the United States had a Silk Road initiative at one point. Historically, though, I think what's important to remember about the Silk Roads or Silk Routes is that was a time in which trade traveled primarily over land. And so, really, there was a major shift that occurred around 1500, driven by a whole host of factors: the invention of large ocean-going vessels, the development of navigational tools, competition between colonial powers, a belief in mercantilism. All of these factors combined to pull commerce to the coastline. And in some respects, although the political map has changed quite a lot, in some respects, in broader economic terms, this is still the world that we live in today, where most trade is being carried by the sea. And so when I look at something like the Belt and Road Initiative, to me, the most ambitious dimension of this are its overland routes. So yes, the Belt and Road includes maritime ports, and it is intended to facilitate trade in the maritime domain. But really the most ambitious dimension of this, it runs through your backyard here. And it's proposing to revive routes that have in some cases had a little bit of commerce or maybe seasonal commerce, but haven't been major trade corridors. And so that, I think that really jumps out in these maps. The Belt and Road, of course, is estimates vary. It was unveiled here in September of 2013, and we hear big numbers associated with it. So some people say it will include $1 trillion in promised infrastructure spending. Some people say $4 trillion. I've seen as high as $8 trillion US dollars. I think the highest of those estimates are a little bit tough to believe, but there's no question that this is a massive endeavor. It also includes more than infrastructure, although what I'm going to focus on today is the infrastructure dimension of it. The Belt and Road includes trade agreements. It includes coordination across a whole host of policy issues. It includes people-to-people connections, tourism, and so on. But I'm going to focus on the infrastructure component of it today. And I'd like to show you 3 projects that I think are illustrative of some of both of the changes that are happening, as well as some of the challenges ahead. So as I mentioned, we have this database and an interactive map at reconnectingasia.csis.org. And it's a work in progress, but we're tracking about 2,400 projects, all of which have been underway since 2006, so a little more than a decade. They were at some stage of either being announced or completed during that time frame. We're tracking only transportation projects right now, so that's what I'll show you. We're going to add power plants later this year, and we're looking to improve this. This is supposed to be a platform to help other researchers. We're looking to improve it by partnering with other organizations, partnering with other scholars. And so if you are looking at it and you say, you guys are missing something, we'd love to hear from you, actually. And sometimes we get, good reports from people who are living in some of the areas in which this activity is taking place. So this is the first of the 3 projects that I'd like to show you. This one, this is a picture of not too far from the Kazakh-Chinese border. And this is a picture of that area in 2010. Has anyone been to Korgos before? Any hands? One in the front. Okay. So this is what the area looked like. Same area looked like in 2017. So so a massive amount of construction. This is something that did not exist. And then what you're seeing emerging here is, a logistics center. And actually, if we go to this next photo, to me, this captures, I think, what is most compelling about Korgos is that it sits on the border and is intended to transfer cargo from one track gauge to another. So the Chinese rail gauge, you can see over on your left, and it's a bit more narrow than the Kazakh gauge. And so they use these big cranes to take the cargo from one train and put it on another one. And I think the other thing that's a little bit illustrative of this is a photo that I took about a year ago in May of 2017. There aren't any trains there. And so, I asked the guide, how often are things coming through here? And they said, well, maybe if you're lucky, something will come later this afternoon. But no trains while I was there, at least. I do know from reports that the volume of rail cargo between China and Europe, some of which passes through this area, is increasing. And in fact, you might have heard of a major development in January of 2017, the first ever train to go from China to London. And I think this opened a lot of people's eyes, at least in Europe and especially in the U.S. They started to sort of wake up and say, oh, something is happening here. We should pay attention to it. And this train, I think, though, is sort of a proof of concept. And so they were able to send. It actually wasn't one train because it needed to change every time the track gauge changes. So that happens at the border with Kazakhstan, happens again at the border with Belarus and Poland, and I think they had to change one more time in order to get it to go through a tunnel on its way to London. The cargo that was carried was a lot of consumer goods, which in terms of making the business case for using rail, non-perishable items are not usually what you want to send unless they're very high-value items. So there are some companies, including U.S. companies like Hewlett-Packard, who send some of their electronics from China to Europe using these new rail services. And in fact, a decade ago, there were almost no regular rail services between China and Europe. Today, thanks in part to the Belt and Road and other initiatives, about 35 Chinese cities are connected with about 34 European cities, and they have regular services leaving about every week. Now, the business case for using rail, rather than sending goods by sea, is that it's faster. So it's about half the amount of time if you use rail to send goods from China to Europe than if you sent them by ship. And it's less expensive than if you were to send them by air. So that's it's being marketed as a middle option between air and shipping. Okay, so this is one of the other. This is actually a set of projects. We're looking at sort of a grouping of transportation projects that are part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And so the Belt and Road has 6 corridors. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is probably the most advanced, just in terms of the number of projects that are underway, the amount of money that's been spent. And so in some respects, this is a flagship component of the Belt and Road. The total costs fluctuate just as they do with the big banner numbers for Belt and Road, where we're looking at around 62 billion in total projects that have been announced for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. You can see that, for Pakistan, this is really a significant expansion of roads, throughout the country. These roads would touch a very high percentage of Pakistan's population lives within about 5 to 10 kilometers of this road network. And that's what this slide is showing. But there are challenges, and one of them in Pakistan's case is the security environment. And so we can see here, this is a map of terrorist incidents, and you can see the attacks are not, they're not dispersed evenly. There are some areas that are more dangerous than others. And some of those areas are close to some of the routes that are part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And we know that, in fact, workers that have been working on CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects, have been attacked. About 50 of them have been killed. Pakistan has assembled a force of about 15,000 troops to increase security for these projects. And so they're clearly responding and trying to limit the risk to their workers on these projects. But obviously, security is an issue in some of the areas through which we're looking at building new projects. Something that gets overlooked sometimes, I think, just because it's 2018, technology is pretty far along. We think, people have been to the moon, so why couldn't we build something? Why can't we build a road between two countries? In some cases, the just physical terrain is very challenging. And so this is a satellite photo of the China-Pakistan border, and so the pass that links them. The roads, even if the roads are improved, this pass will be seasonal, and so it'll be shut down for about 4 months every year because of the snow. And it's just, to me, a reminder that, Mother Nature is still a force to contend with, and still something that is going to shape. It's going to constrain some of the ambitions that we have for creating new corridors. And of course, even when the roads are in great shape, as I learned, this is actually a photo of crossing from China into Kyrgyzstan. If you look, the road's in great shape. But this is, I think, checkpoint number 5 or 6 of about 10 checkpoints that you have to go through to cross one border from China to Kyrgyzstan. And so it's a reminder that even if the hard infrastructure, the roads, are in good shape, we still need to improve the soft infrastructure. You need to improve customs. There's, to my knowledge, no reason why there should be 10 checkpoints, and why this is actually these were trucks lining up because at this checkpoint the guards had gone on their lunch break, which is about 3 hours, and so that's not a highly tuned customs regime. So obviously a little room for improvement there as well. This is the last project that I'll show you, and actually there have been some changes to it recently. But this is a bridge that is connecting China and Russia in the Far East, and it's going over the Amur River. This is literally an area where about 50 years ago, Russian and Chinese troops clashed at the border. And so now they're building a bridge, literally building a bridge between these two countries. And their leaders are talking about having a strategic partnership. They've talked about linking the Belt and Road with the Eurasian Economic Union. But some of the projects have been slower than others. This is an example of a project that I think was started about 12 years ago. And so there's no date on this photo. I think this is from last year. And you can see there's a little bit more enthusiasm on the Chinese side to build the bridge than the Russian side. Part of the challenge, and this is a legitimate economic concern, is that commodity prices fell significantly after this bridge was started. And so one of its main reasons, one of its main commercial reasons, is to carry ore from a Russian mine into China. And so when commodity prices fell, the commercial logic for the bridge wasn't quite as persuasive, and that might have contributed to it being put on hold. I believe that this is almost done now and should be completed later this year. And so, again, sometimes these things take a lot more time than we expect. And in fact, large infrastructure projects globally almost always take longer than expected. They almost always cost more than expected. They almost always deliver fewer benefits than expected, and that's in the best business environments. And so these are just very difficult projects. I have a lot of sympathy for the people, the engineers who are involved, the managers who are involved. These are big undertakings, and so I think we should expect that some of these projects are going to run into some difficulty in the future. And just to step back and conclude here, the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that even though the Belt and Road is receiving perhaps the most attention of any of the connectivity efforts underway today, it's not the only vision. And I think the Belt and Road's future is going to depend on the ability of it to be integrated with other visions. This is a notional example of what some of Russia's priorities are. You can see the north-south transport corridor, which is supposed to connect Mumbai with Moscow. It's also supposed to include a maritime component. There are a few high-profile energy projects. The Eurasian Economic Union is an important soft component to the vision. Japan is very active in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, where, at least in our database, they're actually outspending China in several Southeast Asian states. India, although its priorities are mainly focused domestically, also has a few flagship projects beyond its borders, including a port that is a port in Iran, Chabahar, which is in some respects a response to a port that China has been building in Pakistan. Iran is spending heavily on its infrastructure. I think it's committed 1% of oil revenue toward its rail system, which is both an important symbolic commitment as well as an important financial one. And you can see that geography matters, and so Iran's jockeying to become a hub, as many countries are who find themselves between China and Europe. And so why don't I wrap it up there? I'd be very interested to hear from all of you about how the Belt and Road is perceived here, whether you see it as something that is going to be important in the future. Is it something that is exaggerated? Would love to hear from you. Thanks.
Time for questions and answers. If you have a question, please stand up, shout your name, and shout your question out. Or you can just use the microphone. Just to practice your vocal questions. Okay, no questions?
Thank you, Jonathan, for presentation. My name is Anabek, and I'm a graduate student here at Nazarbayev University. So my question is, as I understood, this map shows only existing projects, yes? Or does it include, so what about the prospective projects, and would it be great to see what will happen in the future?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. We track, I think, 6 status levels of projects, so everything from announced all the way to completed, or in some cases canceled, and so everything in between there, so under construction. So we do track all of those status levels, and we update them. It's tough to update 2,400 projects, but I'd say we end up updating all of the projects at least every year, sometimes more frequently if they're higher profile projects.
Thank you.
Also, can I ask you one more question related to the projects in Kazakhstan? Because as I see, a lot of projects in our country are coming from international development banks like Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and so on. As the suggestion, like maybe you can cooperate with them, like they can provide you the information of the upcoming projects and they can update you each month, each year, each quarter, and so on, as example.
Yeah, and it's a great suggestion. We have a partnership with the Asian Development Bank, actually, where they every summer they spend 2 months updating the data that we have on their projects, and we'd like to do more of that with others, to include the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the EBRD, the World Bank, and so on. So the project is at a very basic level, just intended to help people understand what's actually happening, or in some cases not happening, with projects, because there's a lot of official rhetoric about big initiatives, and so our view is that in order to really understand these, you have to look at individual projects to understand what the implications are. So that's at a very basic level. What we are aspiring to do, and it's supposed to be a platform that other people can use and contribute to and benefit from for their own research and reporting and so on. Yes, yeah, and since we're a think tank, we do analysis with the data as well, and we hope that our analysis informs policy. And so, policymakers are one of our target audiences. So we're trying to get people to not only care about these issues, but also to recommend actions that could lead to better outcomes.
I mean, the corridors going through the Kazakhstan.
So I think let's use the rail freight as an example. I think right now about 1.25% of the volume of trade between China and Europe is going by rail, and so a lot of that's going through Kazakhstan, but it's only 1.25% of the total share. Some experts think that over the next decade that could double. And so, I mean, anything doubling is significant, especially if you're located in a key position as Kazakhstan is. So I think that has that will have implications for anyone who's using those services, anyone who's operating the services. But it's not, to me, it's not going to change the overwhelming dominance of sending goods by sea, just because that's for many for structural reasons it's cheaper to do that. You have to pass through fewer borders. So I think there's still a lot of room for growth in the overland routes, but on the very I still expect the sort of the ocean freight to remain dominant.
Thank you.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank you for a very interesting presentation, excellent visuals, and the photos, they just convey, how the situation is with the project too. And also, we were very impressed with your bio. I think it's an honor to have a person like you here. You are so young and so accomplished, and the question that I had in my mind, being the brilliant person that you are, what has sparked your interest in this project specifically? I'm sure you had so many avenues in which you could pursue and develop and explore more. But why this project specifically, and what has motivated you?
Thanks. So I mean, I think you guys get pretty good speakers, right? I mean, you had Xi Jinping here announcing the Belt and Road, so I think you guys do pretty well. My personal interest in this comes from having been interested in Central Asia for some time. I was a Fulbright scholar in Kyrgyzstan and spent time there, but then I worked on trade issues for the U.S. government. And to me, this is an extension of that. Infrastructure is, one of the main reasons for infrastructure is to promote trade. And I think it's an interesting opportunity for me because infrastructure is usually viewed as more of a domestic issue. And I'm someone with a foreign policy background trying to think about sort of what some of the broader implications are. So that's been an opportunity. And I think if there's a lesson there, I think when you're a more junior scholar, when you can try to find a niche or try to provide a new perspective on something. So my opportunity was providing sort of a foreign policy perspective on a set of issues that's usually looked at as domestic.
So, hello, my name is Haidar, and you said that U.S. starts to pay attention to those projects. And my question is, how does U.S. participate in those infrastructure projects in general?
It's a great question. I mean, so I think there are several avenues for the U.S. to participate. One is through the multilateral development banks. So the U.S. recently came out in support of increasing the World Bank's capital, the amount of money the World Bank has in order to lend, and so I think that was a positive development. The U.S. is also part of the Asian Development Bank and other multilateral development banks. So that's one avenue. There's also, I think the U.S. private sector is genuinely interested in some of these projects. There are infrastructure firms who we're not tracking right now. We're not tracking power yet, but General Electric, for example, is involved in some projects, including in Pakistan. Honeywell and other companies are involved. And then, there are also U.S. investors who I think, if there's a lot of money, especially in institutional investment funds, that would love to be put toward infrastructure assets if they felt like the risk was manageable, and so that's another avenue for U.S. involvement.
Those projects are very attractive to investors. I mean, those projects involve many countries. Many of them are politically unstable, economically, and so on and so forth. Are they attractive for investors?
Yeah, so I think, some of the reasons that you mentioned. So first of all, even in the U.S., a very small amount of private investment is going toward infrastructure, and so. I think more will need to be done in order to attract more private sector investment. That's also, the government can help with that. I think, if they're able to put money toward projects that make them that offset some of the risk for private sector stakeholders, then you have the calculus starts to change on the business end, and so the question is whether you can do enough of that in order to get enough interest from the private sector.
Hello, my name is Sultanat. Maybe you know that Kazakhstan wants to be the hub for fertilizers. And what should be the flow rate to create this hub? Like, how many freight should go through the Kazakhstan to create the hub?
Sorry, you said. Yeah. So I think I think it depends. I think what is the goal of that hub? Is it for physical goods? Is it for financial flows? Is it for people traveling, tourism? I think those are all opportunities. So I'm not sure that there's. I'm sorry. I'm not sure that there's an easy answer for that one.
The road initiatives traverse many countries which may have different political regimes. What are the major challenges to achieve a level of cooperation and equity and fairness among the key players?
So yeah, I think ultimately that is at the heart of this. I think there's a contest that's happening right now. Countries are trying to connect with each other in a way that advances their own interests. And that's not a bad thing. Competition can be a good thing. It's good for recipient countries if they have more options, for financing. It's good if they have more connections with other economies. So all that's positive. I do think, though, that competition can create some risks, and so especially in terms of governments and legal regimes. I think a lot could be done to make sure that some of these transactions are more transparent, that procurement is open, and so anyone is able to participate. Contracts, deals are being done on the merits rather than relationships. Those are all not new challenges, but certainly worth more attention. Yeah.
I have a softball question for you. Any colorful anecdotes or stories? You've been on the ground and your team as well, going to Korgos and places that perhaps have not been open to foreigners or have had a colorful history in the past. Have you had experiences that you would share with respect to how you've been received, taking photos and engaging and talking with people, level of receptivity?
So I've been welcome to all the places that I showed with photos. I had no personal issues. I think people are generally. I think one way to look at it is if you're beginning a new project, having someone come in from the outside is a risk. That's one way to look at it, or it's an opportunity because it's good advertising. If you've got a good product, if you've got a compelling story, I think you want to share that with people. And so, I was definitely welcome at Korgos. Got a great tour, learned a lot. I'm hoping to go to Oktau next week, actually, and see the port there. But yeah, I've been really grateful to have had access and been able to learn about these places.
And what about your personal infrastructure, CSIS? What type of resources are being applied to mapping out these initiatives?
Yeah, so this is a major project for us. We've got a team of 2 full-time research assistants. So these are people with master's degrees, and then we have a team of 4 interns who are adding project data every day. And then, I'm obviously involved with the project as well. And so for us, for my organization, this is a major investment and something that is being looked at as a long-term investment, because I think these issues, you really do need to stick with something like this for a while in order to be able to see changes, to be able to draw lessons learned. Infrastructure is a slower moving set of issues.
And clearly you also gave us a mandate in terms of sharing information with you. Have you any specific questions for the members of this audience?
Yeah, so I'd welcome any reactions to any comments, and also I really would encourage you to visit our website and let us know what we can improve. We do want to make this comprehensive, accurate, and useful. And so if you're looking to do more on these issues for your own research, or if you work for a company or hoping to work for a company that works on these issues, would love to hear from you.
Yes, of course.
Hi, my name is Anara. I'm an MBA student at Nazarbayev University. So basically, I understand that One Belt, One Road is a politically decided project, but a lot of citizens in Kazakhstan consider this as a potential threat for Kazakhstani economy, and how will this project affect us, as a country? So basically, my question is, how does United States of America consider this One Belt, One Road project as an opportunity or more like a threat to the region, since China is expanding further? So basically, the economical presence will expand through these projects. What's your position in terms of this?
So it's a very good question. I think there's a range of reactions in the United States. I think the U.S. private sector is very interested. They see this activity, they want to be involved in it. So they're trying to figure out how they can compete for deals, or if not as primary contractors, as subcontractors. There's another set of companies that's interested in using these routes, and sort of how can their supply chains benefit from these new options. So Hewlett-Packard shipping computers. FedEx is also doing some work in this area. The U.S. government's position has been a bit more skeptical, and they sent a representative to the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing last year, but they certainly have not signed on as a participant to the Belt and Road. And there's been, I think, a series of statements from top U.S. officials about what they see as some of the dangers, particularly related to debt and lending, and developing economies taking on too much debt, and especially if that debt is not invested in productive assets, they see that as a longer-term risk. And I think some of that is also you hear echoed in different ways also in the EU as well. But my hope is that the U.S. response is not going to be to outright oppose this, but to say we're for good infrastructure projects, and let's support those regardless of who funds them, but on their merits. And there should be a process by which debt concerns are addressed through that as well.
My friends, another question? Okay, yes.
So, looking at your data, I noticed that Kazakhstan has a lot of roads, a few railroads. Kyrgyzstan is sort of, you can't really see the Kyrgyzstan in there because the roads are prevalent. What about Mongolia?
There is I mean, some of this is also just reflective of the availability of information too. So I mean, I know that there is obviously a lot of construction in Mongolia. You know, a lot of the big projects we've seen in Mongolia have been related to mining. You know, because you need to have good roads and sometimes rail links in order to be able to have productive mines. But you know, we're at sort of early stages with this where I wouldn't yet just from the visual draw necessarily conclusions about sort of patterns yet. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in India, for example, that is not on this. And so we actually, if you were on the website, you could zoom into the map and you would see the roads have been geotagged, which takes a long time to do, and you need good information to be able to do it. And so we're typically only able to do that for about a third of our projects. So we've got a whole nother, we've got twice as many as you see here extra in the database.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation again. My question is, if we look at the Pakistan Chinese railways, we notice that as you said, Pakistan heavily relies on the commodities from China. So that's why these railroads are really developed, even though they know that there is a danger of it. But on the contrast, when you were on the Kazakh-Chinese border, you noticed that there weren't much of the trains here. So what do you think the reasons that on the Kazakh-Chinese border there aren't much trains? So the difference in the policy regarding the railways between the countries.
So as far as I'm aware, I don't think that there's a China-Pakistan rail link yet. I think it's been something that's been talked about as one of the possible solutions to the fact that the roads close because of the weather. Perhaps if they were able to build some kind of tunnel and maybe a rail link, that would be a year-round access. But as far as I know, it's the only connection is a road. And in terms of the activity on the Kazakh-Chinese border, it is increasing, and so I think no one can predict the future. I think in order for it to increase more, I think two things or maybe three things need to happen. One is that companies who are making shipment decisions need to decide that this is going to save them money, and I think it's realistic to think that some of them are still learning about it as an option. It would also be helpful if China continues to subsidize the routes, which it does, and that's part of the reason why some companies have been able to make the math work. And then more broadly, though, there's also there's a trade imbalance between China and Europe, and so the lack of activity on the Chinese-Kazakh border is even more significant going from Kazakhstan into China. So a lot of the rail cargo that's going from China to the EU, there's not significant enough demand in the reverse direction to fill all of those containers, and so often you have trains coming back, only partially full, or sometimes the containers are even shipped back by sea. So just the broader trade relationship is something that could have an impact as well.
Thank you.
Hello. You mentioned that you're going to Aktau next week or somehow, and I remember the news that now USA is opening is going to use ports in Aktau in order to ship their products to Afghanistan. And how is it going to influence Kazakhstan? And what can you tell about this news? Because we have it on our portals, but we don't really know a lot about it.
Sorry, could you repeat that? So the decision was to ship
Some products, you just said that some products like help to Afghanistan to recover its economy, like
from the U.S. though.
probably from US, we don't know, but just it's in the news it says that USA and Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan allowed to use its port to ship the products.
Okay. Yeah,
It's everywhere on the news.
Okay, sorry. I've been traveling for 48 hours, and so I missed the story, but I'll have to catch up. Sorry.
Maybe this is the reason why you're going.
Oh no. I'm interested generally because it's sometimes talked about as part of these east-west links. So the idea that cargo would travel there, but then via ship head across the Caspian. So I'm interested in that component of it because I haven't been to the Caspian before.
Hi, my name is Marjan. My question is, what other benefits can Kazakhstan get from this project? Just except being just funnel between China and Europe.
Yeah, sure. So let me give you one example that is often overlooked. We did a short report about a year ago, which is on our website, looking at the state of Kazakhstan's roads and viewing that as a road safety issue. So if you're able to increase the quality of your roads, you're not only able to carry more goods, but they could also be safer too. And the economic benefit from having fewer deaths on the road is very significant. I mean, it's percentage points of GDP. So I think in our rough estimate, raising the quality of just the roads domestically, which partially could be done through outside initiatives like Belt and Road or Kazakhstan's own programs, right, like Nurly Zhol and others. Spending on roads could actually save lives, which has its own economic benefit.
The question was about business opportunities here.
Yeah, so I think I can go back to it. I think Korgos is an example of this. So you see on the bottom is the dry port is up there, and that's what I showed you this photo of. I didn't show you a photo of what's marked as an industrial zone because there wasn't anything there yet when I was there. But the idea of having that area there is that you would actually have some kind of assembly and manufacturing happening there. And so there would be some tax incentives to have companies set up there. And so that's one element of this.
What about the maintenance costs? I mean, as far as you might know, we have very low population density in Kazakhstan. So, and these roads, I mean, ground roads, railroads, whatever, they have to be maintained. So, how does this factor impact? The feasibility of building the roads and maintaining them.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's sometimes that's left out of the initial cost estimates, and that can be risky because as you're mentioning, you need to maintain these assets, whether it's a road or a port or a railway, and that costs money, and you need to have employees to do all of that. It's also an opportunity, though. It's an opportunity for employment. And so I think the key is to make sure that when you're doing the the initial feasibility study, including the cost component of it, that you're including operations and maintenance in those estimates. And maybe that means paying more upfront for something that's going to cost less in the longer term. That's often a difficult political decision to make, but I think it's very important to have that be part of the planning process.
So, how do you estimate our national strategy called Nurli? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with it. I mean, I think there's been, I'm familiar with it at the top line of having infrastructure be a priority, having improving the roads, linking to Belt and Road.
And the last question, you didn't mention any corridors from India to Central Asia, including Kazakhstan. Are there any ones or any projects anticipated?
Yeah, I think there could be the north-south transport corridor might have. And there's also the India Central Asia transport corridor. So I mean, they are interested in certainly in connecting with Central Asia. I think the challenge is that the vast majority of their own money is just going on improving their own roads within their own borders.
Because Indian goods are pretty compelling here in Kazakhstan. They're considered very compelling because of their price. But the corridor issue is the huge. I mean, it delivers a lot of costs and expenses on the goods costs and prices. So.